It is such a great honor to be presenting to you my research in the 2021 International Multidisciplinary Research Conference. I am going to share with you my screen so that you can see my presentation. My research is entitled The Emotional Competence and Academic Performance of Senior High School Students. I am Vivencio Angelo Marquez Jr., a senior high school teacher from Quezon Science High School, Department of Education. Public high schools with a specialized science curriculum are regarded as the place for the cream of the crop. Enrollment in these schools usually requires the rigorous selection of students, such as passing an entrance exam, comprehensive interview, and meeting the grade requirements. Moreover, the perceived greater challenge in the curriculum adds both value and prestige to the diploma received from any of these schools. Quezon Science High School is an institution of excellence in science and technology under the Department of Education, and it aims to prepare its students for careers in science and technology and contributes to the development of the nation by nurturing them to become proficient professionals and leaders. The researcher teaches the subjects oral communication and personal development. The students revealed their inner thoughts in classroom discussions and work outputs. And the researcher learned that some students are emotionally down, with instances of crying during activities. The teacher's reflection and observation journal revealed the following occurrences. Students suddenly cried in separate multiple instances, which led to the disruption of the class. Multiple instances where students asked to go out of the classroom because he or she was feeling emotionally down. Students sitting on the floor while crying in the corner of the classroom. And some essays, class outputs of the students revealed that they experienced anxiety, stress, and being emotionally not okay. Further, data from the guidance counselor's office revealed the number of students that went through behavior management and counseling, which is emotionally related. In 2018, 11 students, but in 2019, it grew to 54. Therefore, we have an increase of 43 students, equivalent to a 390% increase. This problem is also experienced by students around the world because an article published by National Education Association updated March 2019, the title was The Epidemic of Anxiety Among Today's Students, and a survey from PEW Research Center also revealed that anxiety and depression was the top major problem that teens see among their peers. Objective. This study determined the emotional competence of the grade 11 senior high school students in its relationship to their academic performance in oral communication and in personal development. Emotional competence. This is the resulting characteristic of the grade 11 students based on the Profile of Emotional Competence questionnaire. Statement of the problem. It answered the following specific questions. First, what is the level of emotional competence of grade 11 students according to the result of the Profile of Emotional Competence? Second, what is the academic performance of the grade 11 students in oral communication and personal development? Number 3, is there a significant relationship between grade 11 students' performance and emotional competence? And lastly, what framework for emotional competence and academic performance may be developed? This study tested that there is no significant relationship between grade 11 students' performance and emotional competence. The theoretical framework is anchored in Daniel Goleman's emotional competency model of 1997 and states that emotional competencies are not innate talents, but rather learned capabilities that must be worked on and developed to achieve outstanding performance as the highest level of social adaptation. The research paradigm, we have the input, which is the level of emotional competence, followed by the process, which is the teaching learning process in oral communication and personal development. Then the significant relationship will be tested. And then we are going to also to get the academic performance for oral communication and personal development. And the final output is the framework for emotional competence and academic performance. The researcher foresees that the result of this study will benefit the following. The teachers, because they will know how to handle students with emotional challenges and to come up with innovative ways inside the classroom to help enhance the students' emotional competence. The students, this study will help sharpen their emotional competence and deepen their understanding. For the parents, they will gain knowledge on the emotional competence of children in school and will know how to deal with it. And the community, if the teachers know how to handle or react and deal with students with emotional challenges, then they will be able to help the students on how to focus more on their studies. And in the future, when they graduate, they will be a productive constituents of the community. For the methodology, the research design is the descriptive method. Purposive and convenient sampling was used. The respondents are all of the 63 grade 11 students, which represent the total population. And the study was conducted at Quezon Science High School, Tayabas, Quezon Province. The following data gathering instruments were used. First is the Profile of Emotional Competence, or the PEC. This was given to the two sections of grade 11 students handled by the researcher. The purpose of the PEC is to determine the emotional competence of the 63 grade 11 students. The PEC is a product of more than 10 years of research developed by Basur and Mikolakshak. Several studies on a total of nearly 22,000 subjects were used to validate it. This table shows the verbal interpretation of emotional competence. So we can see the scale, the range 1 to 5, the verbal interpretation, and the corresponding emotional competence, which is high, moderate, and low. Number 2 is the school document analysis. Grade 11 students' academic performance in oral communication and personal development during the first and second grading periods were processed and analyzed. Upon the OIC head's approval of the request to conduct the researcher conducted an orientation to the respondents before asking for their consent. Also, proper safekeeping of the documents was implemented to respect the participants' right to confidentiality. The profile of emotional competence, or PEC, was given to the respondents. Then, the researcher taught and gave activities to the grade 11 students of oral communication and personal development, and the activities were graded as applicable. The data gathered were computed, tabulated, analyzed, and interpreted. Statistical treatment. Frequency count and percentage were used in describing the students' emotional competence and performance in oral communication and in personal development. Weighted mean was used to determine the grade 11 students' emotional competence from the result of the profile of emotional competence. Pearson's product moment correlation was used to test for the significant relationship in the grade 11 students' performance in oral communication and personal development with emotional competence. Results and discussion. First, the level of emotional competence of grade 11 students based on the profile of emotional competence. Of the 63 grade 11 students, 30 were classified as having high emotional competence, 29 have moderate, while 4 belong to the low emotional competence. To back up and further understand more the result, the researcher interviewed 10 grade 11 students and asked the question about what affects them most emotionally and how they cope with it, which will be discussed later in the developed framework for emotional competence and academic performance of grade 11 students part. Second, the academic performance of the grade 11 students in oral communication and personal development. The table shows an overwhelming result of grade 11 students' performance. In the first grading period, all students were outstanding in their performance in both courses, oral communication and personal development. In the second grading period, 1 out of the 63 students got a grade of 85 to 89, which is very satisfactory in oral communication. On the other hand, all of the 63 students were outstanding in personal development. Third, the significant relationship between grade 11 students' academic performance and emotional competence. The table shows the significant relationship of the grade 11 students' performance in oral communication and in personal development with emotional competence. A high correlation exists between emotional competence and oral communication based on the result of Pearson's R of 0.748. Furthermore, since the p-value is 0, which is less than the 0.05 level of significance, the hypothesis was rejected and concludes that there is a significant relationship between grade 11 students' emotional competence and their performance in oral communication. A high correlation also exists between emotional competence and personal development based on the result of the Pearson's R of 0.717. Furthermore, since the p-value is 0, which is less than the 0.05 level of significance, the hypothesis was rejected and concludes that there is a significant relationship between grade 11 students' emotional competence and their performance in personal development. Develop framework for emotional competence and academic performance of grade 11 students. As we can see, the emotional competence is divided into two parts. First is the interpersonal, which is the others, and intrapersonal, which pertains to the self. And these two are further divided into 5 core specific emotional competencies, which is identification, understanding, listening, regulation, and use of emotions. To back up and further understand the result, the researcher interviewed 10 grade 11 students and asked the question about what affects them most emotionally and how they cope with it to determine the specific emotional competencies, others, and self. The table below shows the results. So we can see the students, there are 10 students, their academic performance, the level of emotional competence, and the core emotional competency interview categories, which we will discuss in the next slide. This is the framework for emotional competence and academic performance. So we can see the yellow part tells us that all the students have an outstanding academic performance. And then the emotional competence, high, moderate, and low, interconnecting with the specific core emotional competency, the high to identification self, regulation, self, and use others, while the moderate is interconnecting to regulation self, and the low emotional competence is connected to the regulation others. Identification self. Student number 10 manifested disability. This pertains to how a student is able to identify how he or she feels in a certain situation and therefore adjust and cope if necessary. Expressions of this may include coping mechanisms such as changing oneself to be more presentable to others in order to gain acceptance and appreciation from them by treating them well by giving respect. Regulation self. Students 2, number 4, number 5, and number 8 manifested this ability. This is the ability of a student to regulate emotions, thoughts, and behaviors effectively in different situations. The ability to self-regulate includes how well the student manages stress, controls impulses, and motivates himself or herself. This is oftentimes manifested through positive self-talks to regulate emotions, coupled with optimism and emotional release. Use of emotion self. Student number 7 and number 9 manifested this ability. This is the student's ability to make constructive and respectful choices about his or her own personal behavior and whether the personal choices and life changes a student makes are based on his or her emotions. Expressions of this may include engaging in passions and activities that are interesting to the person, like painting, dancing, sports, and others, or which serve as a distraction to cope with a particular situation that affects them emotionally. Use of emotion others. Student number 1 and number 3 manifested this ability. This pertains to whether the student can easily get what he or she wants from others. This also refers to whether it is easy for the student to make others feel uneasy. Expressions of this may include connecting or engaging with others as a coping mechanism, whether through conversations, activities, or as outlets for emotional expression. Regulation others. Student number 6 manifested this ability. This pertains to how the student can easily calm other people who are stressed or anxious, and whether he or she knows how to handle a situation when other people come to him or her crying. This is expressed through instances such as cheering other people up or making other people feel better, which in turn makes the student feel better as well. Conclusions. Considering the implications in the field of education, having high emotional competence is important because the results show that there is a high positive significant relationship between emotional competence and the academic performance of students. This is very important, especially during this time of COVID-19 pandemic, where students are experiencing emotional and mental health challenges, especially due to the drastic shift of learning modality to online or remote learning. Teachers and educators must focus on improving not just the academic curriculum, but also consider incorporating programs that help support the development of students' emotional competence and well-being. Further, it is recommended to create and implement an emotional competence learning program which can address and develop the core emotional competencies of the students. Second is to assist students with low emotional competence to deal with stress and emotional challenges by helping them identify their individual strengths and weaknesses. And to conduct a similar research study considering other courses in the basic education curriculum. I end my presentation with this quote: we must teach not only the mind, but also train the heart. Thank you very much. And that sums up my research presentation.